Elias Thorne tucked a worn pencil behind his ear and felt the familiar hum of his workbench vibrating through his palms. His workshop, tucked away in the deepest sublevels of the Aurelia 4 trading station, was a cramped sanctuary filled with the scent of ozone, burnt solder, and stale coffee. Up on the higher spires, the high-born Nilarians and Praxians lived in sterile luxury, but down here, Elias lived among the scrap, the discarded junk that he alone knew how to turn into gold. "Back at it again, aren't you?" Elias muttered softly. Before him lay a massive robotic cargo arm that moved with a stuttering, mechanical cough. A soft, rhythmic tapping at the metal doorframe made him turn. There stood Kaylee. She was a Xinthian child, her skin a soft, iridescent blue, but it was her eyes that told a tragic story. They were a milky, clouded white, devoid of sight. A predatory virus had claimed her vision and her hearing years ago, leaving her trapped in a world of absolute silence and shadow. "Hey there, kiddo," Elias said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, even though he knew the words would never reach her. Kylie guided herself inward, her small hands grazing the walls until she reached the sturdy wooden stool Elias kept just for her. This was her ritual. She came to feel the heartbeat of the station through the vibrations of his workshop. As a former sound engineer from Earth, Elias understood something the advanced alien doctors didn't. The universe wasn't just seen or heard, it was felt. Elias walked over and gently took Kylie's hand. With his fingertips, he tapped a specific rhythm into her palm. Tap, tap, tap. A faint, beautiful smile lit up Kylie's face. It was their secret code. "I'm here." But today was different. Kylie's hands were trembling slightly. She reached into the pocket of her tunic and pulled out a jagged piece of crystal, a broken optical sensor from an Ilarian medical drone. She held it out to him, her head tilted, as if searching for a sound that wasn't there. Elias took the cold crystal and looked at Kaylee's lifeless eyes. "Everyone says you're trapped in the dark, Kaylee," Elias whispered, his voice thick with a mix of anger and resolve. "But they don't know that humans do their best work in the dark." He pushed his welding goggles down and grabbed his multi-tool. He had made a decision. If he couldn't give her light, he would give her a feeling. He was going to build something no alien scientist had even dared to imagine. He was going to create a neural symphony, a haptic suit that would translate the station's every hum, every footstep, and every breath into a complex tapestry of vibrations, a language of touch that Kaylee could feel in her very bones. As Elias began to strip the wires of a salvaged comms array, the heavy rhythmic thud of armored boots echoed in the corridor outside. The station's elite guard had heard rumors of a crude human tampering with a Xinthian child. But Elias didn't look up. He had work to do, and for the first time in a long time, the lowly human of Aurelia 4 was about to perform a miracle. The air in the workshop grew heavy, thick with the smell of ionized copper and the ozone tang of a soldering iron pushed to its limit. Elias didn't need to look at the clock to know he was running out of time. On Aurelia 4, unauthorized modification of biological subjects was a crime that carried a one-way ticket to the vacuum of space. And here he was, rewiring the nervous system of a Xinthian noble's child with parts scavenged from a toaster and a long-range radio. "Keep your hands still, Kaylee," Elias whispered, though his voice was mostly for his own comfort. He was working on the haptic core. To any other species, it looked like a mess of silver filaments and jagged crystals, but to Elias, it was a masterpiece. He had stripped the vibration compensators from an old mining drill, devices meant to stabilize tons of rock and miniaturize them. He wasn't trying to make Kaylee see light. He was trying to make her feel the world as a physical song. The Praxians use photons. The Nilarians use neural links. But humans? We use whatever doesn't break, Elias muttered, his hands steady despite the exhaustion clawing at his mind. He picked up a set of micro-tweezers. He had to bridge the gap between the Zynthian's unique dermal receptors and his translated soundscapes. Every movement had to be precise. If he slipped, he wouldn't just fail, he could cause a sensory overload that would shatter Kaylee's mind. Suddenly, a heavy, metallic thump echoed from the upper deck. It wasn't the usual sound of a cargo crate falling. It was rhythmic, deliberate, the sound of magnetic-soled boots used by the Aurelia enforcers. Kaylee flinched. She couldn't hear the boots, but she could feel the heavy resonance through the floorboards. She reached out blindly, her small blue hand grasping at the air until it found Elias's grease-stained sleeve. Her grip was tight, desperate. "I know, kiddo. I feel them too," Elias said, his jaw tightening. He looked at the suit. It wasn't a suit yet, more like a harness of wires and pressure pads. It looked crude, ugly, and dangerously human. To the enforcers, this wouldn't look like a medical miracle. It would look like a torture device. "Elias Thorne!" A voice boomed from the corridor, amplified by a helmet's external speakers. The voice was cold, synthesized, and carried the unmistakable arrogance of the station council. "Open Sector 4G immediately. We have reports of a Class 5 biological tampering in progress." Elias ignored them. He had one final connection to make. He reached for a small, glowing blue vial, synthesized nerve gel. It was expensive, illegal, and the only thing that could fuse his machine to Kaylee's skin without scarring her. Bam! The first kick hit the door. The heavy steel groaned, but Elias had reinforced the frame years ago with recycled titanium. He had maybe 2 minutes. "Kaylee, listen to me." "Well, don't listen, just trust me," Elias said, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He draped the harness over her small shoulders. The wires looked like silver veins running across her blue skin. He began to apply the gel, his fingers moving with the frantic grace of a pianist playing the final movement of a symphony. "They think you're a broken toy," he whispered, as the door buckled under a second strike. "They think because you don't fit their scanners, you don't belong in their world. But humans, we don't care about fitting in. We make the world fit us." He clicked the final capacitor into place. A low, rhythmic hum began to emanate from the harness. It wasn't a sound, it was a pulse, a heartbeat. Kaylee's head snapped back. Her white, clouded eyes widened. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't in a void. She felt the hum of the station's reactor 3 levels down. She felt the frantic rhythm of Elias's heart. She felt the cold, sharp vibration of the enforcer's boots outside the door. The world was no longer silent. It was a vibration. It was a symphony. Crack! The door's hydraulic seal snapped. The heavy metal slab slid open, revealing 4 towering figures in obsidian black armor. Their pulse rifles were leveled directly at Elias's chest. "Step away from the subject, human," the lead enforcer hissed, the red visor of his helmet glowing like a demon's eye in the dim workshop. "By order of the High Council, you are under arrest for crimes against the great species." Elias didn't move. He stood in front of Kaylee, his shadow casting a protective veil over the small girl. He didn't have a pulse rifle. He didn't have armor.
He only had a heavy adjustable wrench in his hand and a look in his eyes that had sent ripples of fear through Earth's enemies decades ago. "The girl stays with me," Elias said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "And if you want her, you're going to find out exactly why they call us Deathworlders." Behind him, Kaylee stood up. She wasn't stumbling. She wasn't reaching for walls. She was looking, truly looking, directly at the red visor of the lead enforcer, her body swaying in perfect synchronization with the vibrations of his breathing. The broken girl had just found her rhythm.
The lead enforcer, a Praxian named Commander Vax, didn't move. His species was known for their cold logic and their absolute disdain for lesser biology. To him, Elias Thorne was nothing more than a biological error, a relic of a primitive race that still used combustion engines and physical tools. A wrench human. Vax's voice crackled through his helmet, dripping with a synthesized sneer. "You threaten a Tier 1 combat unit with a piece of prehistoric plumbing. This is why your species remains confined to the galactic fringes. You lack the intellect to understand when you have already lost." Elias didn't blink. He felt the sweat rolling down his back, but his grip on the heavy carbon steel wrench was like iron. "You see a wrench, Vax. I see a lever. And Archimedes once said that with a long enough lever, I could move the world. Imagine what I can do to your helmet." Behind Elias, Kaylee was changing. The haptic harness hummed with a low, predatory frequency. Through the pads pressed against her skin, she wasn't just feeling the room, she was mapping it. To her, Vax wasn't a terrifying soldier. He was a rhythmic pulse of heavy machinery and a rapidly beating heart. She could feel the mechanical whine of his armor's servos. She could feel the heat radiating from his pulse rifle. "The child is a ward of the Zynthian High Estate," Vax continued, taking a heavy step forward. The magnetic floor plates groaned under his weight. "Your experiment is a desecration. Step aside, or we will be forced to use lethal redirection." "One step," Elias warned, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "One more step, and I stop being a mechanic and start being a soldier again. You don't want to see the difference." Vax chuckled, a dry, mechanical sound. He gestured to his 3 subordinates. "Secure the subject. Eliminate the human if he resists." As the 3 enforcers lunged forward, Elias didn't swing the wrench. Instead, he kicked a hidden lever beneath his workbench. Thwack! A high-pressure steam line, which Elias had conveniently forgotten to shield, burst open. A wall of scalding white vapor hissed into the room, instantly blinding the enforcers' infrared sensors. Their advanced HUDs, heads-up displays, went haywire, unable to process the sudden thermal bloom. "Contact lost, switching to ultrasonic," one of the soldiers shouted. But Elias was already moving. He didn't need sensors. He knew every square inch of this grease-stained hellhole. He moved through the steam like a ghost, his boots silent on the rubber mats he'd laid down months ago. He appeared behind the first soldier. With a roar of effort, Elias swung the wrench. He didn't aim for the armor. He aimed for the joint. The heavy steel collided with the soldier's knee actuator with the sound of a sledgehammer hitting an anvil. The soldier buckled, his power armor screaming in electronic protest as the hydraulics failed. "Kaylee, left side, 3 steps!" Elias yelled. Kaylee didn't hesitate. She felt the vibration of the second soldier's heavy footsteps through the floor. She didn't need eyes to know he was swinging his shock baton. She felt the displacement of air, the whoosh of energy. She ducked with a grace that was almost supernatural, her body moving in perfect counter-rhythm to the soldier's clumsy, armored momentum.
She wasn't just surviving, she was dancing to the music of the fight. Elias grabbed a heavy magnetic clamp from his bench and hurled it. The device latched onto the second soldier's chest plate, its powerful magnets instantly short-circuiting his rifle's firing pin. "What is this?" Vax roared, firing blindly into the steam. The red bolts of energy hissed through the air, melting metal and scorching the walls. "How can the blind child evade us?" "Because she's not blind anymore, you arrogant son of a bitch," Elias shouted from the shadows. "She's hearing the world through my hands. She's feeling the heartbeat of this station. You're fighting a girl who knows your next move before your brain even tells your muscles to move." Elias lunged at Vax, but the commander was faster. He caught Elias by the throat with a gauntleted hand, slamming him back against a rack of heavy engine parts. The impact knocked the wind out of Elias's lungs, and his wrench clattered to the floor. "Impressive parlor tricks, human," Vax hissed, his visor inches from Elias's face. "But your ingenuity ends here. I will crush your throat, and then I will take the girl to the laboratories where they will strip that filth from her skin." Ely felt it. She felt the sudden jagged spike in Elias's heart rate. She felt the violent vibration of the metal rack hitting the wall. For the first time, the music of the world turned dark and discordant.
She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached for the haptic harness on her chest and turned the master dial, the one Elias had told her never to touch. The overdrive. The harness didn't just vibrate now, it screamed. It emitted a localized high-frequency sonic pulse, a byproduct of the human mining tech Elias had used. To a human, it was just a loud noise. To a Praxian, whose entire nervous system was tuned to high-frequency communication, it was like a grenade going off inside their skull. Vax shrieked, dropping Elias and clutching his helmet. His subordinates collapsed to their knees, their internal comm systems feedback looping into a deafening roar. Elias slumped to the floor, gasping for air. He looked up to see Kaylee standing in the center of the steam, her iridescent skin glowing with a fierce, ethereal light. She looked like a vengeful goddess of the void. "Elias!" He froze. It was a hoarse, shaky sound. Kaylee hadn't spoken in years. Her vocal cords were stiff, unused, but she had felt the vibration of his name in her mind through the suit. "Elias!" "Run!" He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his emergency kit and Kaylee's hand. The enforcers were down, but they wouldn't stay down for long. The entire station would be crawling with soldiers in minutes. "We're not just running, kid," Elias said, spitting blood onto the floor and looking at the door. "We're going to the upper levels. If they want to call us monsters, let's show them what a human and his broken friend can really do." The industrial elevator groaned as it ascended, a sound Elias had always found comforting, like the deep breathing of a great beast. But today, the sound was punctuated by the frantic beating of two hearts. Elias looked down at Kaylee. She was standing perfectly still, but her fingers were flying across the haptic sensors on her forearms, tuning herself to the changing environment. As they crossed the threshold from the sump, the industrial underbelly, into the spire, the very air changed. It went from the smell of oil and recycled oxygen to the scent of synthetic jasmine and filtered mountain air. "Stay close, Kaylee," Elias whispered. "The floor here is made of polished glimmer stone. It's smooth. The vibrations will feel different, sharper like glass." Kaylee nodded, her head tilting. To her, the transition was a sensory explosion. The sump had been a low, rhythmic thrum. The spire was a high-pitched, chaotic orchestra. She could feel the hum of anti-gravity plates, the flutter of decorative fountains, and the distant, rhythmic pulses of the spire's elite inhabitants. The elevator doors slid open to reveal a hallway that looked more like a cathedral than a space station. Vaulted ceilings, floating gardens, and walls that shimmered with holographic art. "Identify yourselves," a voice rang out. Two high-guard sentinels, dressed in ceremonial but deadly white and gold kinetic armor, blocked the path. Unlike the enforcers below, these were Nilarians, tall, slender, and possessing 4 eyes that scanned Elias with visible disgust. "I am Elias Thorne, resident engineer of Sector 4G, Elias said, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I am here to see Ambassador Valerius of the Zynthian estate. I have a delivery." "The human mechanic?" the taller guard sneered, his lower pair of eyes narrowing. "The Council has already issued a warrant for your termination. You are accused of kidnapping a noble seed." "Kidnapping?" Elias let out a dry, harsh laugh. He stepped aside, revealing Kaylee. "Look at her. Does she look like a victim to you?" The guards froze. They had seen Kaylee many times before. She was the tragic princess, a silent ghost often carried in a hovering medical pod. But the girl standing before them was different. She wasn't being carried. She wasn't stumbling. She was standing with a posture that mirrored Elias, shoulders back, chin up, her feet planted firmly on the glimmerstone. "The girl is blind and deaf," the guard stammered. "How is she looking at me?" "She isn't looking at you with her eyes, pal," Elias said, taking a step forward. "She's looking at the heat signatures your armor is bleeding. She's looking at the way your weight shifts on those fancy boots. She's seeing you through a human lens." "Seize them!" the guard shouted, reaching for his kinetic pike. But Elias was faster. He didn't use a wrench this time. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small palm-sized device, a static burster he'd made. He slammed it against the wall's holographic interface. The spire's lights flickered and died. The holographic gardens vanished into static. In the sudden darkness, the Nilarian guards, whose eyes were calibrated for the brilliant light of the upper levels, were momentarily paralyzed. "Now, Kaylee, the B-sharp rhythm," Elias commanded. Kaylee closed her white eyes. She didn't need the light. Through the haptic harness, the darkness was irrelevant. She felt the vibrations of the guards' panic, the erratic thumping of their hearts, the clatter of their pikes. She moved like a blur of blue light. She didn't strike to kill, she struck to disable. Following the rhythm Elias had taught her, she swept the legs of the first guard, using his own kinetic momentum against him. As the second guard tried to aim his pike, she stepped into his blind spot, the area where his armor's servos created a momentary vibration lag, and jammed a small metal pin Elias had given her into the suit's emergency release. The golden armor hissed and fell apart, leaving the elite warrior standing in his undersuit, shivering in the sudden cold. "Witchcraft," the guard whispered. "No," Elias said, grabbing Kaylee's hand as they ran past. "Engineering." They reached the great doors of the ambassador's wing. Behind them they could hear the alarms, a high-frequency shriek that tore through the air. Elias knew they had seconds before the heavy response teams arrived. He didn't knock. He used a small thermal charge to blow the locks. Inside, the room was silent. Ambassador Valerius, a Zynthian of great age and even greater pride, sat behind a desk made of solid starlight. He didn't look up as the smoke cleared. "You have caused quite a disturbance, human," the ambassador said, his voice like dry parchment. "My daughter has been mourning Kaylee's condition for years. To see you parade her around like a puppet on wires, it is an insult to our entire race." "I'm not parading her, Valerius," Elias gasped, leaning against the doorframe, his lungs burning. "I'm giving her back the world. Kaylee, show him." Kaylee walked forward. The room was vast,
filled with priceless artifacts. She walked straight to the ambassador's desk. She didn't touch anything. She reached out and picked up a small crystal figurine of a Zynthian bird, a delicate thing that even sighted people were afraid to handle. "Grandfather," she whispered. The word was unrefined, the accent human, but the emotion was unmistakable. The ambassador froze. The crystal bird remained steady in her hand. For the first time in his long life, the Zynthian leader felt a spark of something his race had long ago replaced with logic. Wonder.
She spoke? Valerius stood up, his regal robes flowing around him. How? Our physicians said her neural pathways were a wasteland. Your physicians tried to fix a broken radio by looking at the speakers, Elias said, walking toward them. I fixed it by feeling the signal. I didn't try to repair her eyes, Valerius. I built her a new way to listen to the universe. Outside, the sound of the elite guards' heavy rams hitting the outer doors echoed through the hall. Thum, thum. They are coming to kill him, grandfather, Kaylee said, her voice growing stronger. She turned to face the door, her harness pulsing with a protective red light. The human who gave me my soul back. Will you let them? Valerius looked at his granddaughter, then at the grease-covered, exhausted human standing in his pristine office. He saw the wrench tucked into Elias's belt and the defiant glint in his eyes. No, Valerius said, his voice resonating with the authority of 1,000 years. I believe it is time the High Council learned a lesson in prehistoric plumbing. The great doors of the ambassador's chamber didn't just open, they were blasted inward. The High Council's purge squad stormed in, led by High Inquisitor Malachor. These weren't just soldiers, they were the enforcers of racial purity, dressed in white ceramic armor that looked like bone. Ambassador Valerius, Malachor's voice hissed, vibrating through the room. You harbor a criminal and a bio-heretic. Step aside. The human must be neutralized, and the child must be reset to her natural state. Elias stepped in front of Kaylee, his hand tightening on the handle of his wrench. He was exhausted, his muscles screaming, but his eyes were like flint. You want to reset her? Elias growled. You want to push her back into the dark because your pride can't handle the fact that a primitive fixed what you couldn't? Silence, ape. Malachor pointed a slender glowing finger at Elias. Your technology is a cancer. It uses raw vibrations and unshielded frequencies. It is unrefined. It is human. That's exactly why it works, Elias shot back. Valerius stood tall, his presence filling the room. Inquisitor, look at her. Look at my granddaughter. She is not a subject. She is alive. She is a mockery, Malachor retorted. He signaled his guards. Take them. If the ambassador resists, cite Article 9, mental instability. The purge squad moved with synchronized lethal precision, but they made one fatal mistake. They assumed that because Elias was primitive, his workshop-built tech followed the same laws as theirs. Kaylee, Elias whispered, his voice calm. Do you remember the feedback loop lesson? Kaylee nodded.
Has a resonant frequency. You made it so hard, so rigid, that it can't handle a vibration it doesn't expect. Elias slammed the tuning fork against the edge of his steel wrench. The sound was a pure, piercing note that echoed through the marble hall. Simultaneously, Kaylee tapped a sequence into her harness. The suit didn't pulse this time, it amplified. It took the simple sound of the fork and projected it as a directed sonic wave, tuned precisely to the crystalline structure of the Purge Squad's armor. The effect was instantaneous. The bone-white armor of the soldiers began to hum. Then it began to shake. "What? What is this?" Malachor cried out, his own breastplate vibrating so violently it blurred his vision. Crack. A hairline fracture appeared on the lead soldier's helmet. Then another. Within seconds, the invincible ceramic armor began to shatter like cheap porcelain. The soldiers fell, not from a bullet or a blade, but from a sound, a human rhythm they were too advanced to understand. Elias walked up to Malachor, who was trembling on the floor, his armor in ruins around him. Elias didn't strike him. He simply knelt down, the grease on his face contrasting with the sterile floor. "You spent centuries trying to reach perfection," Elias said quietly. "But perfection is a dead end. We humans, we live in the cracks. We live in the noise. And as long as there's noise, we'll find a way to make it sing."
The room fell silent. The Inquisitor's guards were disarmed, their pride shattered along with their suits. 3 months later, the Aurelia 4 station was no longer the same. The sump was still dirty, and the spire was still bright, but the wall between them had a hole in it. Elias Thorne sat on his workbench, watching as a group of Nilarian scientists hovered over a schematic he'd drawn on a grease-stained napkin. They were baffled, frustrated, and deeply inspired. Kaylee sat next to him, her new suit, a sleek, human-designed leather and chrome masterpiece, humming softly. She wasn't just sensing the station anymore. She was teaching other broken children of the galaxy how to hear the music of the stars. "You know," Elias said, ruffling her blue hair, "they're going to want to make 1,000 of these suits. They're going to call it the Thorne Method." Kaylee smiled and tapped a rhythm into his palm. Tap, tap, tap. It meant, "I'm here." But then she added a new rhythm, one Elias had never taught her. It was complex, beautiful, and full of hope. "We are here," she corrected him. Elias looked out at the stars through the cracked window of his shop. For the first time, they didn't look like distant, cold lights. They looked like a symphony waiting to be played. And he knew, as long as humanity was there to build the instruments, the galaxy would never be silent again.